Most game developers really sucks, okay? And I don't say that as a hyperbolic statement. I think that's a statement of fact, from experience and just reality, right? So I worked in the industry for many, many years, and I have seen some incredible lack of competence, guys. So in this video here, I will tell you a story, an example of a horror story, which you probably don't think is real, right? To exemplify how most devs are actually really, really terrible in the game industry. And this is not like a special, I have hundreds of stories, guys. And the topic here in general is that we're gonna discuss why are so many devs, right, afraid of Baldur's Gate 3. It's very reminiscing of Elden Ring. And it's something I've been saying actually for years. So I think I'm broken record, but I made a video actually a few months ago where I kind of covered why I think the game industry has worse and worse developer every year, right? And this really comes back to this thing, especially why AAA studios keeps failing. So I'm going to explain to you here, because I have a very, very easy way to explain actually why AAA studios are miserably failing almost every game they produce, right? So if you're new to the channel, guys, my name is Baldur, right? I've been a game developer for many years, and I will try my best here to give some examples from the industry and why it really is failing. So if you want more of that content, you know, please subscribe, like button, leave a comment below what you guys think. I can tell you many stories, but let's be the topic of the video. So first of all, why are the developers worse actually, right? How to come back to my life experience, and it really is a good example of it. Why are AAA studios failing extra much? So we'll explain it soon here then. Then I was talking about, are too many games being made, right? Because many of the devs complaining about the games, they're like, oh, well, our game is someone, right? And then microtransactions, I guess, and also, I suppose, the cost, right? Yeah, of making video games and so on. By the way, let's get into it. Okay, so let's talk about developers actually being pretty bad. Why are developers so worried and, you know, and so on, right? So this tweet then, right, from Salver Nelson Jr. has almost 1 million views, and you probably have seen it before, right? I'm not the first guy to come at these tweets. I can show you a bunch of other tweets, right, from other people, to the Elden Ring thing, and I actually know this person started this, Ahmed. I know him personally, actually, but regardless, right, I'm not gonna sit here and cover all these different, like, you know, this tweet and that tweet, because you've seen it before, right? I don't care that much, honestly, in that sense. I don't care that much to say these 50 people said this thing, because in my opinion, I'm burning every bridge now, typical Monday style, but I'm like, they're all pretty terrible developers. No, so it's the point last one. I must say that these specific people are bad at their job. I have no real interest, right, sitting here going over a bunch of different tweets or whatever, right, from maybe or maybe not bad developers, right. I want to talk about the general issue, right, of you know, game developers. So most game developers aren't that good. That's just a fact, okay? And I mean, like, mathematically, I mean the competence, I mean algorithm, I mean scripts. They just are shit at it. Like, they're terrible at it, okay? I have thousands of horror stories, and it's not, and I want to put me there. I'm not saying that, you know, you go to the office, you have these 10 developers, and, you know, 2 of them are terrible, and it's annoying. No. I mean that majority are terrible, okay? You go to the office, and you have 10 developers, and it's like 8 of them are terrible. That's the reality, okay? Jesus Christ. And I worked at more than 10 different game companies, and they're all, it's always the same thing. So, this is why. But I do want to really point out that this is a majority, again. This is not that, it's not like the random low occurrence that you have one really bad. No, it's the opposite. You have a few really good developers, and then you have a bunch of really terrible developers. That's actually the reality of it. And the thing is that I just point out, IT industry is similar, okay? The IT industry is similar, it's generally speaking. But it's worse in the game industry. I'll comment on that later why. But anyway, so the game industry has a bunch of issues then, generally speaking, right? Because, yeah, they aren't that good at coding. I mean literally. They are not that good, and especially their mathematical skills are terrible. The reason why is usually because gaming, and this is also kind of the year thing, right? So a lot of game developers, they do game coding and so on, they take a shortcut, right, to become a game developer. So they go to these gaming schools, and this is especially very common in Sweden. So I worked both in Sweden, right, or in Europe, or in America and Japan. And in Sweden especially, they go for this, like, vocational school, like kind of community college is, right? And they basically have no math. So they used to learn how to code for like 2 years, then they go in the game industry. These guys are terrible developers, almost all of them, because they can't even do like an oil. They don't know what Pythagoras is. Like I literally had this thing once where I was trying to explain to a guy that he could use Pythagoras in 3D. He looked at me and said, "I don't speak Greek" or something, and I was like, "Yeah, I guess." But the thing is that I assume everyone knows Pythagoras, right? A2 plus B2 equals C2. The thing is that you can use it in 3D. That is A2, B2, C2 equals D2, okay? If you have an orthogonal thing in 3D, it still is usable, right? So you can see projecting and so on. So I had to explain to this guy, and I looked at him and said, "Why don't you know this, right?" I was trying to be rude to him. This guy's like 25, is a game developer, right? And I'm like, I am not the developer, okay? I think honestly, I have big frustration of things that at this occurrence, right, or most of my occurrences in my life in the industry, I have been a game designer, right, a lead designer and so on, designer. And I'm like, why do I, as a designer, have to explain to you, the developer, the coder, how to write code or math, when that's your job? I'm supposed to be the guy being creative, come up with cool, you know, gameplay ideas, right? I'm not coming up with, you know, like this thing. But honestly, in my experience, I have never once in my life, Jan speaking here, worked at a game company where I am not the best guy in math. Of course, it might be because I'm a math genius, whatever. But honestly, I'm just like, why am I the best guy at math here? You guys supposed to be better than me because you are guys working with it, and I am the one having to tell you how to make an algorithm. Like, this is not how it should be, right? It's very, very frustrating, honestly. But anyway, I digress. So I had to explain to this guy, in my opinion, basic, you know, math, right? And I'm just like, this is something you should have known, but he doesn't, because he went for this like short track to get into the game industry, right? So that's the reason, Jan is speaking, why they are worse also than normal IT developers. Because normal IT developers, they at least have like a bachelor degree or maybe a master degree, right, in engineering, where a lot of game developers are not actual engineers, like straight up, they're fake engineers. I sound super salty now, but I'm just being genuine, and I don't try to be brag and say, "Oh yeah, I'm a real engineer and those guys suck," but honestly, kinda, because yes, most game developers are really bad at generally, you know, physics, chemistry, whatever, and also especially that mathematics, and that hurts, right? Because they're gonna make more bugs. They are terrible at optimizing their code or whatever. They don't understand factorization. They're not very good at what they're doing. They're very bad. And also, the biggest issue, probably in my experience, with a lot of game developers, is they're very bad at adapting. So they can't change language because they go to this very quick program, right, to get into industry as fast as they can. So they learn to like only work in Unreal or something, right? And they learn to only code in like C# or whatever. You know, they do one thing, right? And I didn't go that. I went to learn is all different languages, right? So they can't change. So you ask them, okay, you need a home page, right, to PR our game, and it's written in like HTML. And they're like, what's that? you're like, can't you change your language? I've been there so many times where we've had like a young developers, like in their 20s, and they can't change language. Like they have only worked with one thing. And this thing is written in SID or Java or something, and over there, right? And they can't change. Yeah, and they looked at me like I'm speaking alien language to them, but I'm asking them to, can you please like change the language? And honestly, this is a massive difference from most older than developers, right? We have usually are self-taught or whatever, and they can use like 20 different code languages or scripts or whatever. The younger guys are like one, and you're like, oh my god, this is so frustrating to work with them. But honestly, they are not very good. And I really mean it. Like I really want to emphasize, this is not this like, you have like 10 developers and one of them is terrible. No, it's the opposite. Like 9 of them are terrible and one of them is good at actual coding and so on. Like seriously. It is a massive issue. And that is one big reason, guys, why most games sucks, okay? When it comes to the actual stuff, because they're not good at it, okay? They're not good at developing. I'm being very real here. And of course, everything I'm saying is true for design and artists and all the other parts too, but it's most obvious, right, when it comes to actual like straight up coding and math and logic and so on, because that's gonna cause bugs, right? It's gonna cause actual issues. And it's very, very frustrating. So it's a very, very common issue. Now, let me go into the second factor why. I made a video about this earlier this year, links below for that, right? But this is basically a point I made several times in my life, and that is that there's a big issue today, and it comes back to what you said, right? It's a big issue that, how can I say it? Most developers back in the days, they were like, they really lived and breathed games, right? That's my generation, right? You know, I sound like, I'm the best, guys. Back in my days, we loved video games, you know. But seriously, right? I'm trying not to make a joke here. I have a hard time not doing it. But seriously, back in my days, if you were into gaming, you're also into anime, right? No, but seriously, that's a good example of it. When I was a kid, right, if you wanted to be a game developer, you also watched One Piece and you watched your Gyros or whatever, but you were into video games, right? And you were into anime and manga and, of course, Spider-Man and Batman. And you were a real goddamn nerd, right? You were a nerd to the max, baby, right? But today's current young developers aren't max nerds. They're very, very low on that nerd level. I was on a podcast last month talking about this as well. The nerd level of the developers has fallen massively. They used to be way nerdier. They really were. And the big difference, of course, is that back in my days, right, and obviously people even older than me, right, but you know, back in my days, people were into everything, right? Like, so either you knew video games, and you knew all the anime and so on, and you knew coding, you could do scripting, you could do art. People were really good at everything because they were so into it, right? But today, instead, the younger people that are 15 or whatever, younger than me then, right? 15 years younger and so on, they're coming out in the industry, they're way less nerdy, they might only play video games, they don't watch anime or manga or read comic books or whatever, and that really shows. I'm not saying you have to like watch anime or like Spider-Man to be a good game developer, but isn't it kind of strange? You know what I mean? Like, it used to really be that if you were into video games, if you liked playing, you know, whatever video game you played, fantasy or whatever, right, or Baldur skate or whatever, you were also enjoying, you know, the older stuff like Superman and Batman and Smallville and so on, right? So that is a huge difference, that today we're getting these people that are, you know, generally they like playing games, but they don't live to play games, right? And I mean, it's an obvious weakness to the industry. I'm not saying you have to truly live and breathe games to be a game developer, to be a good one, but let's be honest here. The likelihood of a person that plays games all the time, right, and really loves video games, and think about them all the time, and if they don't play video games, they're watching anime or they're reading comic books, are they gonna be better developers than the guys that play games, you know, every now and then, otherwise they play soccer or whatever? Yeah, I do think that the guys that are into it with their whole life are probably gonna be way better. But the thing is that you don't really want to hire a person, honestly, that went to like a game college, okay? I have very low interest actually hiring someone that went to, like, you know, studying to be a game developer, especially game design. Very low interest in that. What I want to hire is someone that went to, you know, like whatever, a good school, Harvard, MIT, whatever. I want to hire someone that went to, like, to be an engineer, right? And then they like video games. That's the person I want to hire. I want to hire a person who's an actual engineer or whatever, right? Or an artist or whatever. So I want to hire an artist that went to like a fine art degree, right? And then they really love video games or whatever, right? So that's what I want to hire. I want to hire someone that's really interested in the topic, but they actually have real skills, right? And then they apply them into their favorite hobby, whatever that is. It's a video game, a movie, whatever. I don't want to hire someone that went to like a crappy gaming school, which makes them crappy at whatever they're doing, right? Crappy developers, not good in coding, bad design, whatever, don't understand people's emotions, whatever, and then they somewhat like games. That's not what I want. And actually, usually what you find too, and I really mean this thing, is that the people that went to like a typical, you know, university and got like a good degree or whatever, and they're really good at math or whatever, right? They're like a PhD in math or whatever, they're really good at math, and then they also really love games, right? They love, you know, like board games and the math and so on, probability. Those guys, right, are actually more into it than the guys that went to gaming school, because usually the gaming schools aren't necessarily for people that love games the most, if you don't want to be in the industry, right? But actually, like, I ask people that are like PhD in math, right? These guys are PhD in math, and they really love video games, and they usually love, of course, then Baldur's Gate, you know, D&D, card games. I personally, that's kind of my thing, you know, I love also, you know, like Magic Gathering, Hearthstone, right? Those guys that love probability math, as I do, event math, we are really into that stuff, you know. I think it's fun, you know, to calculate different formulas and math and different probability to get the card and this thing, and we love that shit, you know. So we love the math in the games. Those are the guys you want to hire, right, to be a game designer if you want to balance your game, you know, because they really love math and they love games. I don't want to hire a guy that went to like gaming design school that are terrible at math, and because actually, and even, I mean, honestly, those guys are probably not even that into it. The other guys are more into it, but they also really like math. I want to hire, you know, the von Neumann game theory guy, right, which is kind of I am. I want to hire those guys. And also, lastly, it's annoying because they don't know all the stuff either, right? So in my generation, if I say, okay, let's make a character like Luffy in One Piece, you know, he's gonna be stretchy and rubbery. Everyone's like, oh yeah, Luffy in One Piece? Everyone knows because everyone watch anime, you know what I mean? But if I talk to a 20 and say, oh, we're gonna have this new hero, he's gonna be like Luffy. They're like, who's Luffy? I'm like, he's gonna be like this guy, you know, Mr. Fantastic. They're like, Mr. Fantastic? I'm like, Marvel, you know, like I'm trying to give them examples, right? And they can't understand the examples. That also is a very common issue with younger people because they're not as nerdy. I'm like an old angry man, but I think it's a very, very clear issue, right? Why it keeps falling, because the more casual it gets, right, the less serious are them. Now then, why does specific AAA fail even more then? Okay, so why now then is the AAA studios fail even harder than indie studios? Well, actually, it's a very, very simple reason why AAA are failing. They are hiring idiots on purpose. They are hiring yes men, right? Because AAA studios are so obsessed by just keeping their investment, right? Keeping the money they have. So they really use hiring people that will follow up with them, you know, battle passes, Microsoft and so on. I used to work, you know, for Blizzard. I know very well, I know the founder of DICE and so on. I work with people on EA and so on, and I know how they think. They don't want to hire actual good designers or good developers, especially not good designers, because they want to hire people that are just listening to management, right? They don't want to hire people that actually want to make good video games. They want to hire people that are saying like, oh yes boss, you know, and they just do whatever they want, right? Oh, add that extra buy button there, you know. And the designer is like, that's just gonna make the game worse. Remove the function of that, you know. I was, you know, involved personally, but I know people did it, right? In Battlefield, Star Wars Battlefront 2, talked to the design lead of that the day after that thing broke out, you know, everyone hated it. And he was defending it. It was really weird. So I was talking to this guy, honestly, the guy that was like the lead of, yeah, the massive failure of Battlefront 2, right, the Star Wars. And I'm asking him, like, I was like, yeah, between you and me though, bro, like, obviously you know that made the game worse. Like, he was literally making a video game worse, right? He's like, no, it was just a misunderstanding. My design is the thing. I was like, come on, man, like, between you and me, you don't want to have all that micro and you have to play 40 hours to unlock Darth Vader and everything is randomized when you level up. It doesn't make any sense. And he's just like, nah, but I think that's you know, good game design. I'm just like, you have drinking the Kool-Aid, you know. I was like, we're not friends anymore, basically. No, we are not friends, honestly. No, me and him, he hates me. Yeah, he hates me. He hates me to my guts. But honestly, that's the reason why, right? Because I'm just like, you were drinking the Kool-Aid, man. Like, between you and I, can't you at least be honest and say that, like, I was like, man, bro, I understand that you have to make the game shit. Because otherwise, you know, otherwise you probably get fired. I understand that. But between you and I, isn't it true that you know that design is terrible? It's like, no, it's awesome. I think people really like it. It's just Reddit and Twitter being angry at me for no reason. Like, no, the shitty design, you know it's shitty. You know what I mean? And he kept defending it. I was just like, yeah, we can't be friends anymore because you have drinking the Kool-Aid. Right? But that's honestly how it is. They hire people that are just shutting up and just adding those bad passes, right? So AAA studios, they love, and I really mean this, because I've been there myself, right? And they told me to, oh, don't hire that woman. She's really, you know, argumentative. There's just too many of these, you know. Hire that guy instead. It's like an idiot. Just do what he wants. I'm like, but I like this young, you know, this young up-and-coming woman here. She's a lot of personality. She's spunk. I like that, you know. So I am the opposite. I am the guy, like, I want to hire the spunky new person, right? And they're like, no, hire that yes man over there. I was like, no, but he's like an idiot. How would that help me, you know? I can just do the job myself. Why my boss wants CEO, you know, old nice guy, he's told me once that, oh, hire this guy. And I'm just like, but this guy just agrees with me on everything. If I hire the guy who agrees with me on everything, what's the point then? Then I don't need him. If he just agrees with me on whatever I tell him, he agrees. Why do I need to hire him then? He's pointless. Because he's just gonna tell me what I want to hear. He's like, yeah, but, you know, like, no, I don't want to hire him. It's pointless for my development, right? It's terrible. So, that's the issue, right? They are literally hiring people who have the least spunk, right? People that have the least innovative and the least ideas, and that's who they want. Because they already have the formula, right? Oh, we want to make a next Battlefront or next COD. And I worked on 3 COD games, so I know it very well. They want to make the next Call of Duty, right? And honestly, I like Call of Duty, don't get me wrong. I like COD. I worked on Sony Map, so I'm not saying they're all terrible, but I hope people understand what I'm saying is very true, because they basically have the formula, right? There are a few people on top, the lead designers, that are making up new ideas, right? But generally, most people, the art designers and so on, have to make the same thing. So I know the artist kind of guy, I won't say too much here, but the guy that founded DICE, right? And I know the guy that was the lead artist on DICE for like 20 years. And he hated it, right? Because he made the same goddamn tanks basically for 20 years, right? He said it was the worst part of his life, you know. He just had to make the same thing over and over and over again, basically, right? It's just a small difference every game. He hated it, but it became his life, you know. He just did it. And obviously he, you know, eventually completely, he didn't go crazy, but I mean, he just, how say it, he turned dead inside. He just, you know, he quitted kind of, right? He just went to the office and just did the same thing for like 5-6 years or something. He told me how much he hated it. For the last 10 years something at DICE, he did the exact same thing almost every day, right? And he's just like, yeah, I mean, I got a really high salary and I just, you know, whatever, yeah. It's like, that's the effect too, right? So either you have people that are young up-and-comers and they don't pick the worst ones, they just do what they want, or they have people that are completely dead inside at top, right? A lot of it. And of course, back to what I said earlier then, obviously they are mostly hiring people that are actually pretty shitty, right? They're hiring, so actually, especially DICE, they prefer hiring people from like the worst schools, right? As long as they can do the job right. So instead of hiring like a mathematical genius, right, from like the top university of the country, they actually rather hire someone that has like a terrible math skill because they just dare to, you know, do the exact same thing they wanted to do. They're hiring dumb people instead of hiring smart people, and I genuinely mean that. And I probably would ruffle some feathers, but as you probably can guess, everyone hates me anyway because I've always been like this. I've always been that guy. So if you like my channel, subscribe, guys, because I make money. But I never said you hire me again. But honestly, I always been that guy, right? That's always been, of course, the annoying person that sits and say, why are we doing this for? It just makes the game worse, right? I've always been that guy, of course, for the last 15 years, right? That every time the boss tells me that, oh, you have to add this buy button. I'm like, no, I don't want to add it, but it doesn't make the game better. I don't mind the game having, like, you can buy stuff, whatever, but why do I have to add the buy button here in the middle of the screen, like in this scenario, that it ruins the immersion? We can have it buy a button over there, but why do we have it here? And the CEO was like, you have to do it, and I'm just like, but I don't think people buy anyway. It doesn't even help you. I can rather design a better, you know, buy system than what you want to force me to make, because I don't think people buy like that anyway. There's no actual, you know, actual scientific proof for that. Anyway, let me tell you my horror story. Okay, let's get to the juicy horror story. And I made it, I put it later in the video because this is probably the best part of the video. But anyway, guys, okay. Horror stories, right? So, I keep saying this, that the developers are terrible. And they really are. And I really keep saying it, right? But I genuinely mean it. And my horror story, then I have many horror stories, but this is one of my favorites, okay? So, I was working as, you know, lead designer, right? Creative director on this video game. And I was designing the heroes and abilities and mechanics and a little bit of the level design, whatever, right? So I have decided here, right? This main character, basically, if you play the evil faction. So you have like 3 different factions. This is like the main bad guy. This is like, I don't know, Kerrigan or something, I don't know, whatever, right? So you're playing the bad person, right? And this character has a lot of like complicated abilities. Like you can reverse stuff, reflect stuff, you can do a bunch of stuff, right? Because this is a bad guy, he's like a manipulator, so he has a bunch of different, you know, crazy utility magic, basically. He's not a magician, but basically, he's like a crazy guy. Okay, so, I present this idea, right, to, you know, I've done the whole design document, we have the sketch of it, blah, 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 so on. I'm presenting it, you know, in front of all the leads, right, you know, and kind of the senior people at the company, right, okay. So, the developers, you know, doesn't want to do it, right? Because they're like, well, this is too complicated. To code this character, to code this hero, take us at least 6 months, okay? So we can't spend more than a month per hero to code them, right? It's too much. They're like, okay, cool hero design and blah, 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 so on. But to actually implement this hero, right? This is gonna be a 6 months work, right? Okay? 6 months work to implement this hero. And they keep telling me that a month is, you know, the ultimate kind of degree. So we had this long argument for a few hours over this thing on Monday. We have a few hour argument, me, the CTO, the lead programmer, so these guys are the programming guys, right? And again, I'm the lead designer, director, creative guy, right? So I'm working on that point. I'm like, no, you guys are wrong. This is the harder code. This is the complicated, right? So I am doing the whole thing like, you guys are freaking competent. Like, this doesn't take you 6 months of code. Are you stupid? You know, basically, right? Because you get heated up, you know, back and forth. So it ends with them telling me that, or the lead programmer tells me that, okay, if you can do it, right? So he does a challenge to me. He's like, okay, if you can code it, right? I told you before, but that he's like, if you can do this code yourself in a month, he's like, you can do it in a month, okay? Then I will allow it, and then you can decide however you want, right? Okay. So first of all, I like that, right? Because as the game designer, right, I don't want to be, you know, limited, not by the code itself, but I honestly don't want the code to tell me that we don't want your DPS hero because it's there, whatever. No, I am the creative guy, okay? I'm honestly, I don't really that much care about your, you know, I want to make my hero side, right? You know what I mean? Like, this is my idea. I want it to be like this, right? Okay, I don't want you to change it. I don't want you to tell me that it can't be a frostman, it has to be fire. No, it should be frost because I, you know, this thing, right? So I'm like, okay, but then I have 3, okay? So I tell them, right, okay, I will do it a month, but then I have to have 100% freedom to design the hero exactly how I want, right? You know, so you guys can come back to me and you can complain on me, and if the hero is whatever, and I'm not talking about balance, but talking about the actual mechanics, right? If the hero can teleport, he can teleport, okay? So as I can implement myself, that's what we're going with, right? So the guy, the coder guys, they agree, they kind of, okay, they agree that, the artists or whatever, they agree, because I forced them, I was like, hey, you, yeah, so they all agree, okay? So now, it's actually a dream for a designer, honestly, I have to admit here, because now if I can make it happen, right, I can actually completely make this hero exactly as I want, right, you know? Because now everyone else, producer has signed off that whoever this can work, as long as I can make it work, right, it's, I guess what I want. Of course, I tell the story because I got what I want, right? But, even more so, these guys, again, right, told me 6 months, and it's impossible to do it in a month, right, you know? These are the developers, right? These are the guys that are coding, you know, 8 hours a day, right? It took me 2 weeks to implement this character myself, this full hero. And in those 2 weeks, I'm also including writing automated QA scripts. So you can also run the character in the automation and see that there's no bugs too. So I'm also including validation and verification that the character works with all the different reverse abilities, and automated testing every reverse ability and so on. Which is actually the hardest hero in the whole game to also automate. I wrote the automation code for all the characters in that game, and that one was the hardest. So it's literally like 1 week to implement the hero and 1 week to implement the QA automation. That was like double the time doing that. And that month promise they had to me didn't include that, okay? So I didn't even have to include the QA stuff, okay? The automation for that. So I did the automation stuff as well, right? So that was like, yeah, so that was half the time basically. So I literally did this in like a week. They are telling me that these are professional developers, right? 6 months of doing this hero, not including again the automation. I did it in less than a week, okay? Like 4 days, right? So either, you can say I'm just bragging now, either I'm a goddamn genius, which is probably true, but either I'm a genius, or they are terrible, right? But I honestly choose to believe that they're terrible, and I'm not that good. Like, I honestly believe, it should sound better if I believed that I was smart and they were bad, or, you know, they're normal and I'm smart, but I honestly think that they are bad, and maybe I am better than average and they're worse than average, but I think that it is, to me, a horror story where I'm just like, how can you be so bad at developing and writing scripts or whatever, right? You know, how can you be so bad at figuring it out? So let me explain something briefly here. One thing I did, though, of course, was that I had worked on designing the hero, right, and the mechanics and the visuals, whatever, so on. And I worked on that for maybe a week or 2 weeks, right, before I actually, of course, presented the hero, right. So one thing is important to understand, though, is that, of course, I have spent a few hours, or maybe a few days, thinking of how will I actually implement this thing if I have to do it, right? That's fair to point out. So I didn't just do it in a week. I just had thought about it. This is how I should write that thing. Then I will do this check and so on. And then, truth to be told, one of the abilities was so complicated that I just wrote like 50, 60 if statement, okay? Like it was so complicated that I couldn't figure out a good way to do it from like an aggregate standpoint. So I was like if. I just did a gigantic, you know, like a tree of if statement, like a binary tree of if and else. It's bled out like that for like a whole day or something, to be fair. But because I had designed every character basically and every hero in my head, and I had all the math in my head, I didn't do a single mistake in my if tree, so it was perfectly fine. It was no bugs. I mean, I did all the measures, there was no bugs there. But that is true. I brute forced one of the abilities, but by writing like 50, 60 if statements, something like something crazy like that. Like if this happens, do this thing. If. So it was like that. But sure, still though, that took me like less than a day to do that. That was like one workday, right? To write like 50 if statement. After I done that, you know, if there was gonna be a bug, right, I can fix that in like a minute, right? And basically, when I worked in this game, every time there was a bug, you know, I was the QA guy, right? I fixed all the guys' issues mostly in the code, right? Or all the issues, like the animators or the issues, I fixed that. So, like, I sit there in Jenkins, I fix that stuff almost every morning, usually on Monday morning. So I was like, well, yeah, if there is a bug, and the way I look at it, honestly, right, is that if I develop a character, we had a volleyball player in that game that was not more buggy, but probably the most buggy character in that game. And like the way I look at it, I rather like first code, you know, first a script, but first implement all the scripts for this volleyball because it was kind of weird how the ball's gonna fly. And then if I find a bug later, right, I fix that. That to me is way easier. Yeah, first I implement it, and then it's like, okay, if I basically implement it, then I can assume that it's almost perfect, and then I will find a bug here or there, right, by testing it, and then I fix those, and I go in and I rewrite that. That's gonna go faster than trying to like perfect it immediately. But that hero, because I actually wrote like literally every if statement I could basically every situation that could happen, I figured out and wrote the if for that. So that was perfect basically, because I literally designed the game so I knew exactly every situation that could happen right in my head. So I was like, But you get my point. Even if I didn't know that, I could later just fix those small issues, right? It doesn't take 6 months to do it. It takes me like a day or two, and then I can go back and just look at the issues that will happen eventually. It's way faster. So that's the thing too. I was thinking about how to do it, and then I rather throw it out there, right, in development, then I fix it backwards instead of trying to do it perfectly immediately. Like I said, when I did that, like I said, yeah, when I did the volleyball player, that was basically just like a perfect. That wasn't aiming to be perfect because I knew it was very complicated. It was, yeah, the volleyball player was actually, I think, the most complicated thing because every time you opened up its scripts, the Unity, it almost crashed every time. It was so big. It was so many. Yeah, because I remember now, because if you throw the volleyball, it could be like 36 different outcomes. It was so complicated because the volleyball was like if someone dies, because the thing is that other characters can grab the player's ball, then the ball moves with them, and then you have to calculate where the ball is currently, because one of the abilities is throwing the ball wherever it is, right? So your ally or your enemy can pick up the ball and run with the ball, and then you can throw the ball afterwards. That was very complicated, especially if a person dies, if the ball hits them, because then the ball is not the same object in the game if you have the ball. So if you have the ball, it's a buff, but if the ball is on the ground, it's an aura. So that's a weird thing too, because we can't have the game engine couldn't handle having a ball or a buff, I mean, on the ground basically, right? A buff has to be on a unit or a character player, whatever. So if the ball ever dies, the ball has to stay where the corpse is, which means that the buff has to turn into an object on the ground. So they use the code to make an aura, like, you know, like a fire aura on the ground or whatever. So that was very strange in the code. So I had to write it. That was very complicated. That was very complicated. But basically, that's kind of typically you have to cheat a bit, right? Which also is the point why games are so buggy too, because usually you have an ID and then the engine can't handle that. And you're like, well, how do I write this thing to kind of work? But that did work though. But I mean, you have to kind of figure out some like, well, what if the buff turns into like a danger aura on the ground or something? Oh, that's gonna be sweet, yeah. But that was very weird. That actually was more complicated than the reversal hero, yeah, the volleyball player. That was very, very strange. It was like 10 crashes on that ball because they had implemented the wrong everything. So it was like if you throw it into a mountain, there's one crash, and then the tree is another crash, 2 different crashes. And then it was if you throw it into the mountain but like backwards, then was another crash, right? So they fixed the bug of like throwing the ball forward, but then it was like throwing it backwards, then it caused the same crash basically because it's different like coordinations, and then it's positive and negative or whatever. So that was hilarious. There was something like that, yeah, because the game calculates coordination out from a rotation from yourself if you throw stuff in a linear attack. So it's like 0 or -1 to +6 or whatever, yes, or +5, depending on whatever. But that's a lot of detail here. But anyway, so give me a point, right? I actually know that I actually genuinely know that game's code better than developers, and I hate it. And I keep saying it, but I really want to point it out. I really dislike that because I am like, hey, I'm a designer, I'm the happy guy, I'm the funny guy with the ideas, you know. I'm supposed to be the creative guy, right? And yet I feel, or I obviously was objectively, but every day I felt, wait, am I the lead programmer here? Like I'm supposed to be the lead designer, right? Why do I have to implement all the characters? Can you do it yourself? And I understand it sounds like I am like I'm so goddamn braggy. It's hard to not be like that, right, in this context. But in my experience and in my perspective, it comes from that most developers, of course, why tell a story, just aren't that good, you know? They aren't that good at math, at coding, or whatever, right? And like I said earlier, then, because they also recruit those people mostly for the AAA studios, they want to recruit people that aren't, well, okay, let's put it out. It's not that AAA studios recruit people that are stupid or bad per se, but they recruit people that are yes-sayers, right? Which tends to be, of course, stupid because they have less of a personality, right? They have less of a willpower. So they tend to be less skilled because obviously they just want to, be part of the whatever. So they tend to be, it's kind of like One Piece, okay? It's like One Piece, Their Haki is lower, right? Because these guys, they don't have any Haki, right? They're Marines, They just want to be part of the system. Yeah, they don't have any willpower. So their Haki is weaker, right? The pirates have stronger Haki because they have more of self-worth or whatever. But honestly, it's a little bit how it is, right? And that the indie developers, I guess, are usually better, right? Because, yeah, they have more willpower to do something they want to do, right? So they usually are better at whatever, right? That being said, though, I'll say here with the indie developers. Indie developers has an issue, though, and I know a lot of indie guys, and they have a massive issue of their own narcissistic ego, right? Honestly, right? So, yes, indie developers are better than AAA developers, usually, right? Because they burn for it. However, most of them, and I really mean most, right, can't make good games. Because they can't make games people actually want to play, right? Because they make games for themselves. So they have the opposite issue, right? Where AAA studios, they make games to make money. Indie studios, not all, of course, but many of them, make games they want to play, which tend to not actually be good games. Of course, there are some, I know, Hades or whatever, there's some really good indie games. I'm not saying there aren't, just like there are some really good AAA games. Like I like Tactician, it's a good AAA game. But, of course, I think a lot of indie developers, they have the opposite issue, right? Where they use like, this is my dream game. And it's like, yeah. Honestly, I think that this is my dream game, and I make that game because no one ever made it, so I have to make it myself. And then you think like, well, there's probably a reason no one ever made this game. Yeah, it's different, but it's so not fun to play the game. It's not likable, right? It's like, yeah, it's so different, but the reason no one's ever done it before is because the game is terrible. It's episode in Apprentice, okay? Apprentice UK, someone cares. But anyway, Apprentice UK, this episode in Apprentice UK, right? When they make baby food, okay? They make baby food. Best ever is. They're making baby food, or they're selling whatever baby food, right? And one of them is like, why they put skulls on it, So they have, a baby food bottle, right? It's a bottle, right? And they have skulls on it, skulls here. They're like, yeah, why they put skulls on it? Unique selling point, baby. And, and then, of course, the retailers are going to buy this baby bottle, right? With skulls on it. Or like, this is the dumbest idea we've ever seen in our lives. You can't put goddamn skulls on a baby food, because this is like, moms buying food for the babies. They don't want to buy goddamn skulls on the food. This is so stupid, right? They're like, you're fired, right? It's the dumbest idea ever. You can't have goddamn skulls on baby food. It's so stupid. But these people are defending it like, but it's a unique selling point. It is so unique. No one else has skulls on the baby food. We're smart. No, you're the dumbest people ever, right? Of course, all people can have unique ideas, but like, sometimes having a unique selling point is not a good thing, because it's like, no, this is just so stupid that no one else done it before, right? And I've seen that exact same thing in the game industry people are making indie games that are so terribly bad, but they're like, no one's ever made this game before. Like, yeah, because other people have the same idea as you had, and then they change their mind saying that, you know what, this is a terrible idea. Let's not do that. Right? Okay, so I want to go back now, guys, to this thread, right, of the biggest thread of blah, 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 Baldur's Gate, terrible, whatever, right? Because there's one thing, right? We've seen all people say the same thing here, that, oh, but we can't compare to Larian. They have so many developers, they're really, you know, development cycles and yada yada, right? And, you know, blah, blah, blah. So I bring this up, right? Because I am very bothered by this idea that we should accept terrible games, right? 2 reasons why. First of all, no, we shouldn't accept terrible games. And one thing I want to say here, and I know I always hate to say this thing, right? But I think that games should cost more money, right? Baldur's Gate 3 is great because it doesn't have any microtransaction and blah, blah, and so on, right? And I agree with 100%. But I would be willing to pay more money for Baldur's Gate 3. I shouldn't say that probably, but I would be, okay? And I would pay $100 or whatever, right? Because if I knew that this game was this good, right, then I would buy that, you know what I mean? And I guess the opposite you could look at is like during, I don't know, Black Friday, Cyber Monday, whatever, right? And this kind of typical sales, I can buy like a $60 game for $5, right? Even if it isn't the best game ever, I can play it like for 1 day, I can still get it worth my money because it's like so much, you know, dollar per hour thing, right? So if I know a game is very, very good, I'm willing to pay more for that, right? At the same time, I'm also willing to buy these like experimental games for like $20 that I can beat in a few hours. Because there are a few, you know, very special hours, right? So given point. My general idea is that I really do think that games actually should cost more money, right? And don't have any micro one. That actually be better. I would rather have a system where we have, you know, fewer but really worthwhile games buying, right? Because money, I'm rich or whatever, but money I have a lot of, so to speak, right? I have money. I can buy more than 1 game per year, right? You know, that's no problem. But time is the only thing that's finite, right? I only have this much hours per day after the office, you know, I go to work, I go home, whatever. I only have this much hours to play games, right? So I'd rather have fewer, higher, more cost games, right, than a lot of shitty games, you know what I mean? So I think that, honestly, yes, games should cost more, and, you know, try to remove markets and so on. That being said, obviously, it's never gonna happen, because those micro games and so on, right, they're making so much money, you know, on the whole, you know, Kraken and whales and so on. That's not a video, but get my point. They're making so much money because a few people, right, will, you know, put $1,000 into the game. You know, like they will buy these cards, or, you know what I mean. A few consumers will spend thousands of dollars. I used to work for this game company. They were mostly big in the MENA region. So there's a lot of like rich people in Dubai and so on playing this game, right? Those guys can pay so much money, right? So a really rich Dubai person can, you know, easily put like $5,000, $10,000 per month in your game, right? So there is a big difference between, in a way, than free-to-play games, micro and so on. So unfortunately, these companies are never gonna stop with the micro stuff, because, you know, they are living purely on their like Krakens, right, or their whales. There, Kraken is like a bigger whale. They're living purely on the Krakens. So that's a problem itself, though. But that being said, though, and I really think this, I guess my solution would be that we have more costsome, you know, full games, and then all the games with micro stuff should probably be free instead, right? You know, and honestly, probably because it doesn't matter that much. You know what I mean? The games that are making a lot of money on these Krakens, the Kraken is like, oh, I bought your game, $60, right? And then they're also paying $10,000 per month. Yeah, they don't really care about $60. So whatever. But I want to point it out that hopefully in the future we see something like that, right? In my opinion, games will probably cost more, but be like Baldur's Gate 3. They don't have any other stuff. You get a full game immediately. More importantly now, on this content here, right, is this whole thing of there are too many developers and this thing games. Okay. I think there's a massive issue today with industry and game developers. They're making too many games. You know, what is the point, right, of making, I don't know, 500 games that are shit? What's the point? There's no point to that. I personally, I don't buy that many games anymore. You know, maybe I'm just an angry old person, right? But I mean, just point out, this year has had some really good games. You know, I started the year, I guess, with Octopath Traveler 2. I think that's the first game I really liked this year, which I really love. They have Fire Emblem, which I also really like. I have the collector's edition and so on. I love the game. I love Fire Emblem, right? Then we had Zelda, of course, and then we had Street Fighter, and then we had 16, and then we had this game, right? Baldur's Gate 3. So I think we have some really good game this year, absolutely. But we also have like 500 games that I almost find unplayable, right? We have like hundreds of games that are absolute shit. Let's be honest here. And if you look at this from like a historical aspect, when I was a kid, we had way fewer games being released, but the percentage of playable games of those were much higher, right? It is true, perhaps true, you can do the math whatever, but maybe we have actually more good games per year this year than like 20 years ago, because even if there are so many shitty games, we are getting like, I don't know, 10% or really good, so we're getting like a higher total value. That might be true. But my point, of course, is that I think everyone, except the developers, but every one of the gamers would rather have, of course, not what this guy is saying. He's just like, oh, well, they're swinging with the weight and blah, blah, blah. But wouldn't we rather have that all the developers, not all, but I mean, the developers, instead of having, like I say, 10 game developing studios, right, making 10 shit games, have those 10 studios make one game together. Isn't that what we rather want? Right? Isn't that what everyone kind of wants? You don't want like 500 bad games. I'd rather have 5 good games, right? As I mentioned earlier, time is finite, right? I can only play that many games per day, right? You know, I can only play this much, right? Like I said, I think this is a pretty strong game year. I think last year was weak, okay? Last year, Elden Ring, of course, was this huge thing, and then I honestly can't remember what I played for a few months after Elden Ring. I just kept playing Elden Ring, you know what I mean? I can't even, like, what game did I like after Elden Ring? At least for the first, like, 2-3 months after that. I just kept playing Elden Ring, right? Or went back to older games that I liked. Because, yeah, I don't, maybe I missed something there, but not really. This year, though, I think it's like I said, a much better year, right? I'd rather have 5-6 games that I really liked this year. Then I had a couple of other games that I don't love, but it's pretty good. So this year I think it's pretty fine. But yeah, Xenoblade, I don't know. Last year I played Xenoblade 3, I guess. Yeah, like I barely remember what games I played after Elden Ring. Yeah, that wasn't that good. Okay, it wasn't that good year I think last year. So my point, of course, is that last year had several hundreds of bad games, in my opinion, and I think people agree with me. Yeah, last year had a few, let's say, 10 games that were good, right? And then just a bunch of terrible games, right? That's how it is. And this idea that the people here are defending, oh, but we should blah, 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 blah. First of all, I think entitlement. I hate entitlement. I don't like developers acting like you should buy my game and accept that it's buggy or whatever. But honestly, for me, it's even about the bugs, right? Even though I thought about coding before and so on, for me, is that I think most games developed today are just terrible. Yeah, they're not even fun, even if they're not buggy. They're not even buggy, they're bad game design, right? They're bad designers, they're not interesting. They're not better than old games. I have a very hard time, honestly, with so many new games, because I'm just like, I'd rather play older games that have better gameplay, right? I'm very, very bored by most games coming out these thing, right? And we've been talking about this politically or again, whatever, also makes it worse. That's another video, guys, but obviously I think that there is a huge issue there as well, right? But that's like a minor, thing, right? But anyway, let's ignore that for now. But I hope you get my point that, and I think everyone of the gaming community that actually likes video games agree with me. It's like, yeah, wouldn't you rather have way fewer studios? And honestly, from my own experience then in the industry, we are going the absolute wrong direction. We're having this bloated AAA guys, right? That doesn't want to make good games. Just want to make money. That's what about. They're all terrible, basically. Not every AAA, but most of them are terrible, right? And then we have a bunch of these indie studios that are so many instead, right? And I know some people that have worked at EA or whatever and so on, and they stop working there and they make their own, like, oh, we're tired of working for the big boss, let's make our own tiny studios. So example, in Stockholm, they went from having EA Dice Stockholm has almost lost every person that worked there, from the good years, right? Almost everyone has quit there, honestly. Almost everyone. And they either work at Ubisoft now or Embrace or they go Embark, and they went to the other, newer stuff, right? Or they are now indie devs, right? This is not the way to go, I think. honestly, it's a terrible way to go. Because it means that you take the people, right, and they're working on a big AAA studio, which everyone hates their job, I get it. But instead of making good games, right, for a lot of people, right, for high budget or whatever, they're all then making like 20 tiny studios, right, and they're all making mediocre mech games, in my opinion. Like, I am not interested in playing a single game of these people's companies at all. Maybe it's just me, but not a single one of them are making an indie game that I'm interested in, right? But anyway, I'm ranting, guys. What do you guys think? Leave a comment below, please subscribe, press the like button, and have a great day.